You want a heavily armored character that is great at area of effects and could be played as either a ranged character or a martial? Then you should play a soldier. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher aka Thraben, you here for another Starfinder 2nd edition video, and welcome to my soldier guide. Real quick before we get started, there is still Starfinder 2E content coming daily. I think we are in a new week now, but I still have more to say. Please subscribe to this channel if you are enjoying this content. The analytics will mean a lot to me and continue to encourage me to make this content. I am spending a lot of time on this content. We are going to be well north of 40 hours by the time we are done. And if you find yourself in the position to financially support this content, becoming a YouTube member is going to give you early access to all of my videos, as well as show me that people are digging this content and it is worth my time to make. So, we're going to talk about the soldier, go over their basic class features, and then talk about why you might want to play a soldier as opposed to other classes. We're then going to break down the various subclasses, and this time around the subclasses kind of slap, and then go into a bunch of the notable and best feats that you might be building your characters around. Without further ado, let's get into it. The soldier is a constitution-based class with a solid 10 hit points per level plus con modifier, obviously. And their big draw is going to be that they are trained in all armor and are eventually going to go up to legendary armor proficiency. They're trained in martial weapons and they are expert in 2 saving throws at level 1. So solid class core here. At many levels, your plus to hit is going to be 1 less than other classes, since con is your key ability score. But as we're going to see, that might not be a big deal because the action compression of this class is, quite frankly, insane. And you might not mind if you miss, because you're still going to be doing other things when you miss. Before we go any further, it is important to understand the new suppressed condition. So when you are suppressed, you take a -1 circumstance penalty to attack rolls and a -10-foot status penalty to all speeds. And the soldier is going to be very, very good at suppressing enemies. And this is due to their suppressing fire class feature. If you make an attack with a weapon that has the area trait, such as from area fire or auto fire, you use it in a manner that suppresses your targets. Enemies in the affected area who fail their save become suppressed. And again, that is giving that -1 circumstance penalty on attack rolls and -10-foot status penalty to speeds. And there are going to be follow-up abilities that let you do more things to suppressed targets or give you other benefits. Now, here is the big thing that makes this class pop off, and that is primary target. Before you make an area attack with a weapon from something like auto fire or area fire, you can make a ranged strike as a free action with the same weapon against a single creature in the area who is selected as your primary target. Now, if your attack is a burst, you select the creature closest to the center, and if it is a cone or line, you select the creature closest to you. On a hit, if your primary target rolls a success against your area fire or auto fire, they get a failure instead. And just quick thing here. This strike doesn't count towards your multiple attack penalty. So, despite the fact that you might have 1 lower accuracy at some level since you are con-based, you get a 2-action activity that gives you a free action strike, and that strike doesn't count against your map, meaning that outside of that, you could then strike again. And this can lead to some very wild turns in terms of damage output. This is a very strong class feature. And combining this with the previous feature as well, all of these enemies that are in your area fire or auto fire are potentially also getting suppressed as well. So not only are you dealing damage in an area, you're also suppressing enemies and getting a free shot. This means that this class has just superb action economy. And I think this is going to lead into the why should you play this class versus other classes section. And to kick off this section, I think we're going to go back to our first soldier screen here. And let's focus on this for a second. So your key ability score is Constitution. And something that I have talked a lot about on the Kineticist is that since your Constitution modifier does not apply to any skills, a con-based class often is going to really fall short in terms of social situations. And some of the in-combat utility that could be done via skills is not happening using your con, right? The soldier fixed that. The Fearsome Bulwark trait at level 3 lets you use your Constitution modifier instead of Charisma on intimidation checks to coerce or demoralize, and instead of your Strength modifier on athletics checks to reposition or shove. So it is kind of, not always, but kind of like you get to use your key ability score on things that normally require both charisma and strength, which is really cool. And not every single soldier is going to be strength based. I think they are going to be roughly split in half between being strength based and dexterity based. And we'll go into why a little bit later when we start getting into the subclasses. And in terms of using con for other stuff, the walking armory feature also just lets you use your con for determining what armor you can be using. So normally you use strength for that, right? But instead you can use your con modifier. And if you already meet the strength requirement, you get to reduce that armor's bulk by 1. In addition, you also increase the amount of bulk you can carry before being encumbered by half of your constitution modifier rounded up, and increase your maximum carried bulk by your constitution modifier. So like you are hardy, and that shows not only through the raw HP that you are going to get, but also from the fact that you get to use your con modifier to do other things. So you are a con-based class that gets skill and other secondary benefits from that con, which no other class does. You can then go dex for some melee, you can then go strength for some melee weapons if you want, or dex for ranged weapons, and you're going to have good benefits either way. When you start adding in the incredible action compression and the fact that this class can hand out status effects left and right, both including penalties to enemies attacking you and slowing them down, which might be further compounded by difficult terrain that you create, I think there is a lot to like here. So I was pretty mid on the subclasses for the operative, whereas I really like the subclasses for the soldier. I feel like all of them are viable in different ways, and they meaningfully change the play patterns of the class, and I am a big fan of these. So we've got 5 of these to go through, starting with the action hero. Whenever you successfully make a ranged strike with an automatic weapon, you suppress the target until the start of your next turn. In addition, when you auto-fire, the size of the cone is equal to the weapon's full range increment rather than half. When using the auto-fire action, you can designate a target anywhere in the cone to be your primary target rather than the creature closest to you. So this is just very obviously all upside, right? It makes your cones bigger, and it gives you more flexibility with what you do within those cones. So your auto-fire actions are going to feel even better than normal. And in case you're not super familiar with auto-fire yet, this is a 2-action activity. You attempt to hit each creature in a cone with a range equal to half of the weapon's range increment. So that is why this trait that you are getting from being an action hero is meaningful. If you want a more defensive subclass, then Armor Storm might be for you. You get a couple of benefits. First, you never count as being in the area of a ranged weapon you've made an attack with. Then you gain resistance equal to half of your level to all damage against attacks made by suppressed targets. And since your class features are giving you suppressed very frequently, this is great. And as a reminder, when you have resistance, to kind of all attacks. If those attacks are doing multiple different damage types, you are resistant to each one of those types of damage. So this is a big deal, and you are getting this at level 1. Beyond that, you also don't need a free hand to disarm, grapple, reposition, shove, or trip, and you get a +1 status bonus to do those things against suppressed foes. One more thing, as if this didn't give you enough already, when you successfully disarm or do any of those things on a creature, it becomes suppressed until the start of your next turn. So, like, there is a lot here. I think it's like 5 different things. You're not in the area of your own attacks, you get resistance, you don't need a free hand, you get a bonus, and if you do those things, you suppress things. Yeah, that is 5 different benefits from that subclass. Next up is Bombard. So if you want to be doing cool area of effect things all the time, which your class wants to be doing, but you have a large party of, say, 5 or more members, you might be kind of getting your allies caught in the line of fire sometime. Well, that's what this subclass is for. When you attack with an area weapon, you can select a number of allies within the area equal to half of your Constitution modifier. The selected allies are unaffected by the attack. In addition, enemies who succeed on their save against an area attack you make are still suppressed. So that means that the vast majority of the time, you are going to be suppressing all of the enemies that you target. And hence kind of the bombard flavor of this, right? So you get to spare your allies and also make these status effects more consistent on your enemies. Next up is Close Quarters, which is very much the melee-focused one. It might seem weird to go down a melee route when you are like very clearly a class that is meant to do area damage, but this allows you to do area damage with melee weapons. So, as long as you're wielding a two-handed melee weapon, you meet the requirements for soldier feats that require an area weapon. When you're using a soldier feat, any two-handed melee weapon you're wielding gains area, burst 5 feet, and you're unaffected by attacks, your own attacks with that weapon. You can make a melee strike with a two-handed melee weapon instead of a ranged strike with primary target or any other soldier feat. In addition, you gain the whirling swipe feat, which we'll look at right now. So, your weapon gains the area burst 5 feet and unwieldy traits. More on that in a second until the end of turn. If your weapon has reach, the burst radius becomes the reach of your weapon. You area fire with your melee weapon, centering the burst on a corner of a square you occupy, and you obviously don't take damage from it. If you're using a weapon with the backswing or sweep trait, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to the save DC of the attack. If you have primary target, which you do, the primary target strike you make is a melee strike. So this whirling swipe allows you to still kind of do your auto fire type thing, but with a melee weapon. And this means that you can get the 2-action attack. Let me rephrase that. You get the 2-action area damage and the 1-action attack as 2 actions, potentially still suppressing a bunch of people in there. And now let's talk about the unwieldy trait. The unwieldy trait says you can't use an unwieldy weapon more than once per round to strike, and can't use it to strike as part of a reaction, such as reactive strike. Now, in good news here, there are going to be things later on in our class feats that are going to allow us to ignore the unwieldy trait. And there are a couple of unwieldy weapons which with large damage dies like D12s that you can potentially kind of cheat the unwieldy trait off of. And as an aside here, I really like that you can have such different types of soldiers. You're going to have these melee soldiers swinging around malls or whatever, just kind of mowing down and suppressing enemies while making very chunky strikes on them. And you are also going to have people like really doing like suppressing fire, like cover fire for people, maybe creating difficult terrain as well. More on that in a minute. I love what this class is bringing to the table. And they also give you a subclass, a fighting style that increases your social skills. So the erudite warrior gets to choose either diplomacy or society. You become trained in that skill and one lore skill. Whenever you gain armor expertise, You gain expert proficiency in diplomacy or society and the lore skill that you selected. And then when you go up to master and later legendary proficiency in armor, you are going to get the bumps to these skills as well. So if you looked at this class and go, man, I love this class, but I wish it had more skills, well, you can get either scaling diplomacy or society and a scaling lore at level 1 from your fighting style. There's such good variety in these fighting styles. I love them all. Before I go into the feats, let me just say that there are a large number of feats here that interact with area fire or auto fire, as this is like very much an intended play pattern of the class. There are going to be a ton of feats that do area fire or auto fire plus something else. I am not going to go into every single one of those. I'm going to try to give you a good selection of them. I have enjoyed highlighting the fortune effects of Starfinder 2nd Edition, so I'm going to briefly mention Burst of Strength here. This is not something that every single soldier is going to want to take, but if you are athletics focused, this is a reroll on an athletics check that you fail. No notes, great level 1 feat. There are two pretty interesting level 4 feats. The first kind of turns you into a flurry ranger, overwhelming assault. Your multiple attack penalty for attacks against suppressed targets is a -4 or -3 with an agile weapon on your second attack of the turn instead of -5, and -8 or -7 with agile on your third and subsequent attacks of the turn instead of -10. So if you want to be attacking multiple times in a turn, you have the tools to do that. I am more intrigued by punishing salvo, though. So you have to do this after an area fire attack. You make a follow-up strike against your primary target using the same weapon, but you ignore the unwieldy trait on your weapon when using this action. So if you have gained the unwieldy trait from a prior action, or your weapon already maybe has a d12 damage die and hence is unwieldy, you get to just kind of ignore that, and this can be a very, very good way to take multiple attacks with a weapon that normally they don't want you taking multiple attacks with. And if we think about this with primary target, when you do your area fire or auto fire, the attack that you make on your primary target doesn't count towards your multiple attack penalty. So you can do the 2-action area fire, take your strike against the primary target, and then make your third action the punishing salvo attack. So both of those things are going to be at your maximum accuracy, and you get to ignore the unwieldy trait that normally might be getting in the way. And kind of speaking of ignoring the unwieldy trait, you can follow this up then with Punitive Strike at level 6, which is a melee strike against the triggering creature for an attack of opportunity, ignoring the unwieldy trait on any weapons you're wielding for this strike. So you are going to have multiple different ways to cheat unwieldy, which is pretty darn cool. And if you wish you could do that at range instead, that's where Overwatch comes in. Now, doing this same thing at ranged is a little better, so this one comes at 8th level rather than the 6th level of Punitive Strike. It does have to be within your weapon's first range increment, but ranged reactive strikes is kind of wild, and I am still adjusting to how good that seems to be. The other 8th level feat that I like a lot is Run Hot. This lets you area fire twice with the required weapon, which is kind of wild. Now, admittedly, the area of the second area fire, all the creatures in there get a +2 circumstance bonus to their save. But if you're hitting, 3 or more creatures with 2 different AoE for 3 actions, like that is already pretty good. And I believe this is cracked because of primary target. So you get to area fire twice, which triggers primary target, meaning that you are going to make 2 strikes as a part of these actions, and the strikes don't count towards your multiple attack penalty. So unless I am missing somewhere, that is 3 actions for 2 different area fires and 2 different primary target strikes. That seems real good. That seems real good. Now, this is kind of a finishing move, though. After you use this action, your weapon must cool off and can't be used until after your next turn, or until you take any amount of cold damage. So if you are playing an ancestry that has multiple sets of hands, this is probably where the switch hands action comes in and you just kind of swap gear. So 8th level is a really big level for soldiers, and so is 10th level. At 10th level, there's like 4 different feats that are all very good, so we're going to try to go over them quickly. So, anchoring implants. When you suppress a target with one of your attacks, the speed penalty goes up to 20, which is huge. And if you're lucky enough to get a critical hit when you are giving out the suppressed condition, or the target critically failed its save, it becomes stunned. Stunned 1 is very, very good to kind of hand out for free, even if it is only happening occasionally. Brutal Barrage, also at 10. If your next action is to area fire, auto fire, or whirling swipe, add 2 additional weapon damage dice to targets who are adjacent to the center point of impact or within the first 10 feet of a cone or line. Now, this is going to cost you an action, but that can potentially be a lot of extra damage dice spread out over multiple targets, or rather applying to multiple different targets. If you instead want to pick up another reaction, Come Get Some is pretty interesting. This would happen when you are reduced to 0 hit points, and you make a strike with a -2 circumstance penalty, or make an area fire or auto attack, ignoring the unwieldy trait with the save DC decreased by 2. After the attack is concluded, you immediately fall unconscious and gain the dying condition. So you kind of get one more, perhaps devastating blow on the way out. And the last one at level 10 that I think matters is Dance. When you suppress a target with one of your attacks, it also becomes off guard until the start of its turn. And if you are auto-firing in a cone that only attacks a single creature, like you might in a boss encounter, that target takes a -1 circumstance penalty to reflex saves against the auto-fire attack. So kind of like how the soldier has a bunch of different viable subclasses, it feels like the soldier has a ton of different viable feats at critical levels. And I was noting that at levels 4, 8, and 10, there are very significant build-changing choices that you can be making. Next up is a pair of feats that can make moving more awkward for the enemies, starting with Bullet Hell. So you make an area fire or auto fire attack, and until the start of your next turn, any creatures that moves through the area you attacked take 1d4 damage of the same type as the weapon fired per square traveled, with a basic reflex save at the end. On a failure, the creatures become suppressed until the start of your next turn. A fire kineticist had a similar ability where in their overflow area with one of their impulses, you could create sort of fire damage, and I think the damage there was less than 1d4 per square. And Terror Forming does something similar at 14th level. You area fire or auto fire, but you don't designate a primary target, but instead make each square in the area of your attack difficult terrain. If a square was already difficult terrain, it becomes greater difficult terrain instead. And this difficult terrain just stays, is just there, and it says that you can't get rid of it without extensive engineering or magic. So this is like very much devastating the area, ripping apart the battlefield. And this can be very, very tactically good if you roll high in initiative. You could potentially do something like, especially if you are the subclass that has the longer cones. So you send out your giant cone, you make that difficult terrain, and now the enemy can't approach you well, and you can potentially just like sit back and blast with your allies, maybe taking cover while you do so, and martial enemies that want to approach and get into melee range are going to have a very, very bad time. This is pretty cool. At 14th level, you can fan the hammer if you want to. So this allows you to area fire or auto fire twice, ignoring your weapon's unwieldy trait. Now, you don't designate a primary target with this attack, though, and creatures you damage with this attack don't gain the suppressed condition, but this is pretty good in terms of cheating action economy still. It is better the more enemies that are going to be in the area of that area fire. And this has a frequency of once per round, as opposed to something like run hot, which is probably effectively once per combat, since your weapon has to cool off. If you lean into some of the reactions that this class has to offer at 16th level, there is Soldier's Training, which has you choose one of your soldier class feats that gives a reaction, and you get an additional reaction specifically for that class feat. But you can change that feat with your daily preparations. Coordinated Fire is pretty cool as an 18th level feat. So this is a 3-action activity. So you area fire or auto fire without a primary target, but you give an order as a part of firing. Reload, strike, or take cover. Each ally within 30 feet can perform that action as a reaction. So imagine the party that everyone has a gun. You might have 3 allies be able to take a reaction and strike that target. Pretty wild. Domoratosh's Grip at 18th level is going to open up some very weird builds, as you can wield 2-handed weapons in one hand. Meaning that you could do something like have a 2-handed maul in one hand and a 2-handed gun in the other. This is very much an end-of-campaign sort of feat, but it probably allows you to do some pretty silly things. And highlighting one of the 20th level feats, Bullet Typhoon, is pretty cool, as you can use the area fire or auto fire actions as a single action. However, you can't do that more than twice in a round, but I think that's fine, as you can auto fire or area fire, make a full accuracy attack as a part of that, and then repeat that. Yeah, seems pretty good to me. The class feats on this class are quite good as a whole, and I think you have a lot of options that aren't driving you in any one specific direction or sort of pigeonholing you in what you have to do with your build. So let's wrap this one up here. What are my overall thoughts on the class at the end of this sort of evaluation period? Honestly, this class seems incredible. This seems like a top tier class. I was very, very impressed with the Mystic when I read through the Mystic, and I am incredibly impressed by the Soldier as well. Even if your accuracy is not necessarily as high as other classes, you just get to do so much with your actions. There's so much action compression on this class. And I think it is going to take a good deal of playtesting before I kind of figure out the optimal way to break this class in half. I don't know if the melee approach is better than the ranged approach, and I have to kind of get used to the new weapons that are in the system to figure out, like, okay, what is best to throw on this character? Which one of these unwieldy weapons do I want to be wielding, or do I even want to be wielding an unwieldy weapon? But I think people are going to have a lot of fun playing this class, and I think the mechanics of this class promote enough different playstyles that you are not just going to see the same cookie cutter soldier sort of all over the place, like you might see with the fighter, for example, where it's like, oh, okay, I have a D10 reach weapon with the trip trait. Like, all right, good, we figured it out. Slam down, let's go. I think these soldiers are going to have a lot of variety. I like this one a lot, and I am sure there is some nuance that I missed in terms of the class. So if you have any thoughts or if I got anything wrong, please throw those down in the video description, and I would appreciate that lot. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya!